What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday. It's time to go game by game, breaking down every matchup, talking about the players I'd be starting and sitting at every single position. Going to be a very, very long one this week, so sit back, hit the like button. Let's start things off with Bills at Dolphins, Thursday night game, 49-point total. Dolphins currently 1-point home favorites. For the Bills, Miami is a relatively neutral matchup across the board, but is a decently negative matchup for running backs. Thing with James Cook is, though, we date back to last season, at least 16 carries in 7 of their final 9 games. Then he has 19 carries, 3 receptions in week 1. He had twice as many routes run as Ty Johnson and Ray Davis did combined. He joins Josh Allen as must-starts on Buffalo. Behind those two, you've got Keon Coleman, you've got Dalton Kincaid leading the Buffalo Bills in routes run in week 1, with Shakir and Matt Collins a little bit behind them, and then Curtis Samuel a distant third. Samuel, though, as you remember, he was coming off an injury in camp, so I would expect his snaps to go up at the expense of Matt Collins, but it will still be somewhat of a rotation there. I do also want to point out that Buffalo had 5 pass attempts at halftime last week, 23 across the entire game. Allen only had 2 games last season where he had fewer pass attempts than he did in week 1. It was also 6 fewer pass attempts than the lowest volume passing offense on a per game basis last season. So more passing volume is coming for the Buffalo Bills. That will likely happen this week because they respect Miami as an offense a little bit more than they did Arizona, and especially as a defense as well. Like, they kind of just knew last week they were going to be hyperly efficient. As long as they didn't screw up, as long as they didn't make huge mistakes, they were going to win that game. Now, they probably played it a little bit too conservative because it did get to the point where they were trailing by a decent amount. They could have lost that game. I don't think they respected the Cardinals as much as they should have. This week, they're not going to do that against Miami. In my initial run of projections, Keon Coleman is the wide receiver, 36. Dalton Kincaid is a tight end, 10. No other player really projects as startable. But when we think about this offense, again, you're with Josh Allen. So even if someone doesn't project as startable, you could play Shakir if you think he scores a touchdown again, or you need him as your first player off the bench in your second flex spot, something like that. Any player on this offense could do really well, because in any matchup, when Josh Allen is a quarterback, you could have a touchdown. You could have 2 touchdowns. They could score 40 points. And so anyone is playable, but the wide receivers aren't going to project amazingly this week. I want to reiterate that it's a little bit too early to panic on Kincaid. He ran 22 routes to Knox's 12, and he's definitely not going to have the lowest target rate on the team. I would give it a little bit more time before panicking on him. If he's going to remain running, twice as many routes as Dawson Knox, if he's going to be, up there among the leaders on the team in routes run, he's going to have a lot better games than he had in week 1. For the Dolphins, really comes down to the running back. So as of recording this, Mostert is out. Achane seems like he's going to play, but you never know. As we saw on Monday night with Christian McCaffrey, you don't know sometimes with running backs and these injuries. Both these backs are definitely a little bit banged up, but it's kind of tough to know if they were more being like, okay, we don't think Mostert's going to play, which means we definitely need Achane out there healthy, and maybe that's why he didn't practice until Wednesday was the first time he did practice, or is it like an actual injury we need to be concerned about? Tough to know, but you're playing Achane if he's active. You're playing Tyreek Hill no matter what. Massively negative matchup for the wide receivers overall, but most people have a negative matchup. It's also negative for the running backs, slightly negative for the quarterbacks, but it's a massively negative one for the wide receivers. I would find someone other than Tua to stream this week. Tyreek Hill did crush Jalen Waddle in first read percentage in week 1, and Waddle doesn't project amazingly in the matchup, but I think you don't have Mostert out there. You potentially have a limited Achane. I just don't see how you would really bench Waddle. So even though he doesn't project amazingly, I would probably still play Jalen Waddle. If Achane is out, that's a boost to the wide receivers as well. It's a boost to potentially Jonnu Smith, but you probably don't have to play him as well. Other running backs, it would kind of be a guessing game. We would hope to get some sort of word. My guess, though, is that they're going to have Achane, Wilson, and Wright active that you're starting Achane. You're probably not playing Wilson or Wright unless you're in a deeper format. But if Achane were to be a surprise inactive, you're probably starting Wilson as a running back too, maybe Wright in the flex spot, but you also wouldn't want to play Wright in the flex spot because it's a Thursday night game. So it would be difficult. I'll do the projections there if that happens. The hope, though, is, and the expectation is, Achane will be playing and we'll start him and probably don't have to start the other running backs on this team. Sunday games kick off with Raiders at Ravens. 41.5 point total. Ravens massive 9.5 point home favorites. I believe that's the largest favorite of the week. For the Raiders, no one stands out. Adams projects poorly in a very negative matchup. Zamir is going to project poorly in a game where we are expecting a trailing game script. I would not go to the other running backs. I would not touch the quarterback room. So your best play here is Brock Bowers. He'll project worse than Adams, but he's a tight end. So obviously he's going to be better at his position. He's the only one on the team with a positive matchup. He led the team with a 30.8% target percentage in week 1. He also posted a really strong average separation score, a 25% first read share, and that was tied for second among tight ends. So a very strong first week for Bowers. Currently grades out as the number 1 tight end value on DraftKings if you're playing over there. But yeah, I mean, you're probably playing him. You probably have to start Adams, but Adams is not going to project well, and I probably would not play any other players on that team. For the Ravens, Lamar, Henry, Flowers, Andrews, all must starts this week. Likely grades out as my tight end 9 right now. Andrews ran more routes and had a significantly better separation score than Likely. He was just double teamed, triple teamed all night by Kansas City. The Raiders do have a stronger defense than most people think, but they're much worse than the Chiefs. And this game is also in Baltimore, where the Ravens always play better. I think Baltimore is going to score into the upper 20s this week, maybe and get into the low 30s. I would just be starting all of their lead weapons. I think to get right spot for Baltimore. And it's not like they were even bad in week 1. It was just a very difficult matchup for them. Remember, don't panic on Derrick Henry. 12 points per game in losses, 22 points per game in wins. They're the largest favorite of the week. They're home. He's probably going to have a very strong game. Saints at Cowboys. Up next, 45.5 point total. Cowboys 6.5 point home favorites. For the Saints, the Cowboys are a really negative matchup for wide receivers and quarterbacks, a slightly positive one for tight ends, and a relatively neutral one for running backs. Realistically, it's not a great matchup overall because their defense can just overwhelm you. So even if efficiency wise, maybe it's not terrible for tight ends, maybe it's not terrible for running backs. If that pass rush is able to really get going, which they typically can at home, it can be a disaster for the opposing team, as we saw with the Browns last week. So not an amazing spot for Kamara. I'll also point out it's a terrible matchup for running back receptions. It's much better for running backs on the ground. So again, bad spot for Kamara, but given his expected volume, he's a must start. I mean, the amount of touches we're expecting him to get, I don't care if his efficiency is bad. You got to be playing him. I'd also call Olave a must start, even given the matchup. I know he had a tough week 1, but they won by 37 points. I think it was 47-10, something like that. They didn't need him at all. That game was over a couple drives into the game. His separation wasn't great. He wasn't getting a ton of first read targets. So that's something to monitor. If he continues to not separate as much as he has in the past, if he continues to not be the first read on offense, that will be a concern. But I think that's more of just a small sample size, a week 1 thing. And I mean, they didn't need to really go to him. They didn't need to drop a ton of plays to him because everything was working. And then he didn't even play to close out the game because they were winning by so much. So I'm not concerned about him. He's a stud. He's going to lead this team in routes. He's going to be their best player. I think we just need to see them in a roughly competitive game, which is going to happen this week as long as they don't get destroyed. I would keep rolling with him again, him and Kamara. Behind those two, you can play Shaheed. You can play Taysom Hill if you need them. Hill is my tight end 15. Shaheed is my wide receiver 41. Neither one really stands out as an amazing play this week, but those are both playable projections. So if you have to, they're totally fine. Then for the Cowboys, Dak, Lamb, must starts this week. Cooks is my wide receiver 18. Zeke, Rico, they come in as my running backs 34 and 36. The core benefits from Ferguson missing time, right? Like, he was a staple in the red zone. He was a consistent option through the middle of the field. And so it's not enough to make just everyone on this team a must start, obviously, but they're going to have more targets to Cooks, more targets to Lamb. The running backs are going to be used at a higher rate, whether that is on the ground or through the air. It doesn't mean that these backup tight ends are becoming viable. So I think you're definitely starting Lamb and Cooks. Comes down to what you have at running back if you have to play them. The Saints are a slightly negative matchup overall, but I think that's kind of gets overcome in the fact that Dallas just plays so well at home. If they're going to score a ton of points, we just have touchdown upside for these running backs. So if you had to play them, makes me want to throw up saying Zeke is playable, but he is. Next up, we have the Chargers at the Panthers. Very low, 39-point total. Chargers 6.5-point road favorites. For the Chargers, Quentin Johnston was second on the team in routes and fourth among all players in week 1 in first read percentage. To me, that means the Chargers clearly just wanted to get him going. They were designing plays to get him the ball, try to get him going. He just didn't do anything last season. Didn't seem like he did a lot in camp. Try to get him going in the regular season. 3 for 38 was his stat line. So I just don't think it's going to be a thing. Maybe it will be. Those underlying metrics are very, very strong. If that continues, he's going to be someone you're potentially looking at if he's actually going to be utilized that much. In my opinion, though, Ladd's the one you want. Ladd's the best wide receiver on this team. The Panthers are a super negative matchup for wide receivers, and given that they are still kind of working through how they want to run this wide receiver room, I would probably bench them all this week, but Ladd is the one I'm definitely most excited about. He's the one I would want in fantasy. The two you're looking at for the running backs are Dobbins and Gus. Panthers are a very plus matchup for the running back position, both in efficiency on the ground and through the air. The Chargers also have a great offensive line. They are nearly touchdown favorites. And so this is a really good spot for Dobbins, for Gus Edwards. Neither one's going to project amazingly because they're basically going to split and they're not going to have an amazing target share through the air. So Dobbins running back 26, Gus 28, low end running back 2s to high end running back 3s. But if you had to go there, this is a good spot for both of them. Panthers side, Chargers are a very positive matchup for wide receivers. And we can once again project them for a trailing game script. And so the thought process would be that this is a bounce back spot for the receivers here. They're probably going to need to abandon the run at some point. They looked awful, though, in week 1. And it is worth noting that only Adam Thielen had a positive separation score in week 1. I'm holding out hope that Deontay Johnson is going to be fine. It did seem like if you watch back in that game, they clearly drew up the first few plays of the game to get him the ball in the intermediate area of the field. It's just that Bryce Young was terrible. He missed them both times through the interception. Like, it was not a good game for Bryce Young, even given the positive matchup. I think you're probably just benching all Panthers players until they show some form of life. But if you had to play one of them, it would be Deontay Johnson. Giants at Commanders is up next. 44-point total. Commanders 1.5-point home favorites. For the Giants, dream matchup. We're going to be targeting the Commanders all season. Their offense plays fast and their defense is terrible. Commanders are a massively positive matchup for running backs and wide receivers. So definitely a get right spot for both those positions let's be honest, they're going to get shut down by the Browns. They're going to be shut down by the Cowboys over the next 2 weeks. So we maybe have one good game for this Giants team, and maybe they can be like, okay, let's get things going. But they're going to get absolutely destroyed by both of those defenses. So not looking good in the short term after this game. But this week, Malik Neighbors must start. Singletary, strong start as my running back 21. I'd feel pretty good about going back to him. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty decent flex play, especially if you were in a full PPR format. He had 12 targets. He had a carry. He was the first read more often than Malik Neighbors. Like, he had a good game. It's just that his ADOT is super low. And so with 12 targets. I don't remember the exact yardage, but I think combined with the carry, it was like 57 or 58 yards. On 13 opportunities as a wide receiver, you should be getting more than that. So again, full PPR leagues much better, but touchdown chances are there given who they're playing. They're probably going to score a decent amount of points this week. And in full PPR, you're okay if he can rack up 6-7 receptions, even if they don't go for that many yards. Haven't seen his line yet. They haven't actually posted the line yet. But if his underdog projection is around 40 or so yards, I'll be interested. If it's in the upper 40s, in the 50s, I will not be. But I'm hoping it's around 40, in which case we'll take higher on that one. For the Commanders, and Daniel Jones is fine to stream. Is it going to feel good? No. But every single week, no matter what quarterback is playing the Commanders, they'll be viable to stream. As for the Commanders side, Jayden Daniels currently leads all quarterbacks in expected fantasy points, comes in as my quarterback 6 right now in the first run of projections, which will obviously be updated every day after this video. Assuming that he was the first quarterback you drafted and you didn't go like, I don't know, Mahomes and then Jayden Daniels, and now you can trade one of them away. Assuming he's your starting quarterback, I would just roll with him every week until he does not have the most expected fantasy points among quarterbacks. Just that rushing volume is so valuable. Commanders defense is so bad, again, that I don't know if there's going to be very many games this season where the Commanders are able to sit on a lead and run the ball. They're going to have garbage time points galore, so going to be a good spot for fantasy production. Behind him, I'm holding out hope that McLaurin is going to be fine this season. I know he's a good wide receiver. Poor projection on him right now. He ran the most routes on the team. He led the team in first read percentage. They just missed on a 70-yard touchdown. If that ball is thrown about 2 to 3 feet or so closer in, I mean, McLaurin had the guy cooked. It was an easy walk-in touchdown for 70 yards. Obviously, his stat line looks a little bit better if they connect on that play. So I had McLaurin last week. I went with him. I was disappointed in the results, obviously, but I'm going back to him this week. I'm going to play him until we see multiple games in a row where they just can't get it done through the air. So play Daniels, play McLaurin. Also, we're not starting him yet, but I was very encouraged with what we saw from Luke McCaffrey in week 1. It was his first game, obviously, being a rookie, and he wasn't, I think it was a late 3rd round pick, so he wasn't, a first or 2nd round pick here. Second among the team in wide receiver routes. So they threw him out there in week 1 and he was their wide receiver 2. He led the team in average separation score. He was 3rd on the team in first read percentage. The stat line wasn't amazing, but he was tackled the 1-yard line. If he scores there, it looks better. Again, we're not starting him, but to be the clear number 2 wide receiver in your first game, having not been a high-end draft pick on a team that is going to be trailing, is going to have to throw the ball at times, it's impressive. It's something that has upside long-term. Keep an eye on him, definitely. As for the running backs, don't get too excited about the passing game usage. So I saw the target shares and I was like, let's go. Daniels is dumping off to his running backs. And he did, of course, they had 7 receptions on 8 targets for 101 yards. That's awesome, right? But Eckler only ran 10 routes and Brian Robinson ran 7. This was just a great outcome. This was just a few big plays, 17 total routes to get 7 receptions on 8 targets for 101 yards. That's not repeatable. If they're actually only going to run 7 and 10 routes, we can only assume 1 or 2 targets for them each week. It's a strong matchup for running back rushing, a poor one for receiving. I would not be surprised if the receiving volume came crashing down this week. Brian Robinson, running back 27 right now. Eckler, running back 35. Both are playable as slight home favorites in a positive matchup, but neither stand out as must plays. I would not feel bad about playing either one of them, though. Colts at Packers. Up next, 41-point total. Colts 3.5-point road favorites. Opened as 4-point underdogs, but we have the injury to Jordan Love. We have Malik Willis being announced as starter. Of course, that's going to flip things around a little bit in the Colts' favor. For the Colts, Green Bay is a slightly positive matchup all around, and for the most part, we know where the volume is going on Indy. I say for the most part because in week 1, it was actually a little off. Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, Pittman, A.D. Mitchell, that's who we should expect to carry most of the workload in terms of carries and targets, at least until Downs is back, which I'm hoping is in the next couple weeks. Pierce, Ashton Doolin, they mixed in downfield. or they're going to mix in downfield every week, but they mixed in a little bit more in the target share this week than expected. Pierce catches a couple deep balls, including a long touchdown. Ashton Doolin runs 3 routes, but he catches a long touchdown. So we're going to see more volume flow to their top end players over time. Pittman ranked first by a mile in first read percentage. He was 5th among all players in week 1, so his role is very strong. A.D. Mitchell led all wide receivers that ran more than one route in average separation score. So these two are the two we're looking at. They're clearly talented. A.D. Mitchell was wide open for a 30-yard touchdown in the second quarter, then again for a massive gain in the late fourth. Richardson missed him both times. That's going to happen. Richardson giveth and Richardson taketh away. It's just going to happen with such a raw, young quarterback. But there's going to be games where they hit on both those plays. I'd be very excited if I had A.D. Mitchell long-term. I know the stat line wasn't good, but he's clearly a good player, clearly going to have upside long-term. A sneaky ad, but a clear long-term buy for me. Overall, though, AR, JT, Pittman, that's who's starting. Maybe Mitchell if you need him. For the Packers side, dropping from Love down to Malik Willis, it hurts, obviously, right? That's just a terrible drop-off. This was going to be a very fun game to watch, but Malik Willis made 3 starts in his career and he's never thrown for 100 yards. How bad is that? 3 starts. I know that's a small sample size, but he's never hit 100 passing yards in 3 starts. Come on, right? You need to do a little better than that. I'm expecting him to throw for more than that this week, but it's an obvious downgrade to all their wide receivers. I have Jaden Reed in 2 of 3 leagues. I might be able to play Jalen Wright if Achane is out, along with Mostert being out in the Thursday game. In all likelihood, though, that's not going to happen, and I would not play Jalen Wright over Jaden Reed, obviously, if Achane is playing. I definitely don't feel good about it, but in those 2 leagues, I'm just going to keep him in the starting lineup. I just kind of have to. If you had a stronger wide receiver core than I have in those leagues, maybe you can only start 3 wide receivers. I can just start more, so I can start 5 wide receivers in one of the leagues, and I can start 4 in the other. So he's my 4th or 5th wide receiver on those teams. If you can only start 3, and you've got 3 wide receivers that rank inside the top 25, I would have no problem putting him on the bench. I know that he went off last week, but it was 6 targets and 1 rush attempt. And now he has Malik Willis as his quarterback. So obviously the expectation is a drop off there. I think for the most part for Green Bay, you probably want to start Jacobs, and that's it. I don't think they're going to let Malik Willis cook. I think they're pretty much going to lean on the running game, utilize them in the screen game. They're not going to let him push the ball deep downfield like they would with Jordan Love, and that's where the upside comes in. So for the most part, I think it's really Jacobs the only one you want to start. 49ers at Vikings, 45.5 point total, 49ers 6-point road favorites. For the 49ers, looking like Mason's going to start again. I don't think it's confirmed that McCaffrey's out, but seeming like he's going to be. Given what he did against the Jets, I'd be a little bit scared if I was the Vikings. He and Debo are must-starts this week, and I would roll with Ayuk as well. He projected super poorly last week given the matchup against the Jets, along with the expectation that his snaps were going to be somewhat limited. They weren't that limited, though, and given the week of conditioning, I think he's going to be pretty much back. I would expect Ayuk to be himself in week 4, week 5, but every week he's going to get more snaps, going to get better conditioning. I don't think we should downgrade him too much right now. So Mason, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, all I would just play this week. Purdy, he's his usual self, right? Low end 1, high end quarterback 2, decent streaming option, just one does not have a ceiling. For the Vikings, they were able to play very conservatively last week against the Giants. That's not going to be possible against the 49ers this week. Also, you think the team has some history with Sam Darnold, so it's possible they know a little bit more how to rattle him. They know his weaknesses a little bit more than the team, so I'd be a little bit wary. It was a great spot, obviously, for Sam Darnold last week. Not so much this week. We always talk about San Fran being a terrible matchup because not only do they always have a great defense, but the reduced plays aspect. When they get up in the second half and they have these 7, 8, 9, 10-minute drives, that kills the clock. that really reduces plays on the other side. And a combination of a bad matchup and reduced plays is not good for fantasy production. So not a good spot for anyone on the Vikings. We've got Addison now with 2 hurt ankles. Wouldn't want to be playing him. If he's inactive, Jefferson is obviously in a great spot. He's going to have a first read on every play. He's going to have like a 70% first read share. He's probably going to have like a 40% target share. Like, he's going to go off. The question is, do the 49ers really limit that? And so it's not great, but you're starting Jefferson. You probably have to start Aaron Jones as well. Listen, I know that Addison being out wouldn't really impact him, right? Because he's a running back, but they would probably just have to use him more in the screen game, have to just rely on him more overall because they know they can't throw to Jefferson every play. One player I would look at if you're desperate in a 14 or 16 team league is Jalen Nailor. I like him as a prospect. He had a very good camp. If Addison is out, he's not going to project well by any means. I do actually think he's projected 71st. He's literally not going to have a high projection no matter what happens. But I wouldn't be shocked if he had a good game. I think he's actually a quality player. And so if you had to, in a deeper format, you could go with Jalen Nailor. I like him a little bit more over Brendan Powell. Oh, and then I kind of talked about Darnold. But again, I just wouldn't go there. I'm a little bit scared that the 49ers just kind of know how to shut him down and that they will. Next up, we have Browns at Jaguars, 41.5 point total. Jaguars, 3.5 point home favorites. For the Browns, Ford was the 9th most featured running back in week 1. He ranked 6th in expected fantasy points. And even in the blowout, he was in there with 2 minutes left, getting carries, getting goal line work, basically game script proof, right? They get down, he's going to get receptions. They get way down where most running backs are pulled. Apparently, he's still out there getting goal line touches. They get up, he's who they'll lean on. So game script proof, we love that for running backs. Jaguars are a plus matchup for running backs. Ford must start this week. Deshaun Watson looked terrible in week 1. And while it's tough to know what percentage of that was him being terrible versus the Dallas defense being elite, I wouldn't feel good about starting him until he looks at least half competent out there. I stand behind saying that Jameis Winston would be a better fit for this offense than Deshaun Watson is. I can't even describe, though, in fantasy, how much better the skill players would be, how much more value they would have if Winston was the quarterbacks. Will he make mistakes? Oh, yeah. He's going to make a ton of mistakes, throw some terrible passes, but it comes with an ability to at least push the ball downfield and an aggressive mentality. Deshaun Watson is not pushing the ball downfield. He is not being aggressive. And he's still making those mistakes that Jameis Winston would have. So if you're going to have the mistakes anyways, and you're going to have these blow-up plays, and you're going to have this mediocre production, at least have it on a quarterback that can also push the ball downfield and is willing to be a little aggressive. I digress, though. If you ever see Winston as a starting quarterback, it is wheels up for all of the skill players on this team. Unfortunately, not in Njoku right now because he's going to miss some time with an injury. That's also why Ford must start. Basically, when you have these star players go out, they're just going to hyper-focus. They're not going to really go to the backup tight ends that much. They're going to hyper-focus on their skill players. Also, Jaguars led the league in man coverage in week 1, and that was against Miami, who's a team you do not run man coverage against. Now, they were relatively effective for most of the game. They did hit in a few big plays, which is what you expect when there is man coverage. Is a more aggressive defense, but one that when it doesn't work and Tyreek Hill gets open, he runs for a 70-yard touchdown. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. So that's something that you have Amari Cooper. If they're going to run man coverage every 4 to 5 plays, that's going to open up a really high ceiling for Amari Cooper. So Cooper grades out pretty well. Judy could be used in the flex if you needed him, but I would say for the most part, stick with Ford, stick with Cooper, and maybe Judy if you need him. For the Jaguars side, Gabe Davis led the team in routes, but he was last in target percentage. He was last in separation score. He was second to last in first read percentage. Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr. Those are the two you want for the wide receivers. Unfortunately, Cleveland has an elite defense, and so neither one of them is going to grade out very well. You can play Kirk. You can play Brian Thomas Jr. if you need to. The only projected wide receivers 46 and 47 right now. Etienne's been running back 18. Tank Bigsby is running back 44. So I think you're playing Etienne just watch the snaps. He had that very costly fumble, and then Bigsby, outplayed him for the full game, but then actually got more touches than him after that. See if it's a little bit more even this week, and more even through the air, right? They were already in a 50-50 split on the ground. I don't think Tank is going to take over, but if he continues to play as well as he has and looked as good as he has, it wouldn't shock me if Tank had a 55% share of the early down workload, with ETN being, I don't want to say a change of pace back, but more of a exclusive receiving back that mixes in on the ground. And that would obviously be scary if you drafted Travis Etienne, because he'd come in, way less value than where you drafted him. Engram, plan, projects as a tight end 6. There's not that many great tight ends. It's a poor matchup for the wide receivers, and so that's just going to benefit Evan Engram. And then don't play Lawrence this week. Seahawks at Patriots. Up next, very low. 38-point total. Seahawks, 3.5-point road favorites. For the Seahawks, no one projects well. Patriots have a decent defense. They play slow. They want to run the ball a ton. It's just not a good spot. It's a road game. You never want to be playing in New England. So we talked about this with the Bengals last week, being like, listen, the Bengals have good players, but this is a potential spot where, like with the 49ers, I don't want to really compare the Patriots to the 49ers, obviously, but these spots where we can expect low efficiency, and we're also expecting potentially limited play volume. That is a dangerous combination in fantasy that we want to avoid at all costs. I think you're playing Ken Walker if he plays. I think you probably have to play Metcalf. Beyond that, not a spot we want to attack. For the Patriots, Stevenson was the 7th most featured running back in the NFL last week. He was also 7th in expected fantasy points. He's a strong start and a positive matchup against Seattle. After him, you can basically leave the Patriots alone. Hunter Henry, a little bit sneaky, not a bad streaming option at tight end if you lost Njoku, if you lost Ferguson, and you need a replacement. But for the most part, you don't really need to play New England besides Stevenson. But again, I think Hunter Henry's a little bit sneaky. I think he underperformed a little bit in week 1. Next up, we've got Jets at Titans, 40.5-point total. Jets, 3.5-point road favorites. For the Jets, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, must starts. No one else really needs to be played. Conklin had a way lower target share than anticipated. I think that will increase across the season, but that's a lower rate than we were really hoping for. Lazard had a good game, but Mike Williams only ran 6 routes. I think they're being careful with Williams, and so I think it's only going to expand to 10, 12, maybe 15 routes this week. I don't think he just jumps up to 35 routes, but every single route that he's out there running is going to take away from Lazard in terms of routes and in terms of targets. Also, the Titans do have a better secondary than I think most people know, and so I wouldn't really use Lazard unless you're in a deeper format. I know he had a good week, but he's been wide receiver 56 right now. You can probably do better than that. For the Titans, the Jets are obviously a terrible matchup, especially for wide receivers. They're actually a slightly positive matchup for running backs, and as you saw with San Fran on Monday night, the best way to attack them is on the ground. Pollard was the clear lead back in week 1, and while their coach said that they want to get Spears more work, he also said it was going to be 50-50, and that didn't happen. So I would consider Pollard a strong start. Spears, more of a lower end flex play, maybe a second flex play. I got this split wrong. I really thought it was going to be 50-50 because that's what they were telling us. That's what beat reporters were telling us. That's what everyone around the team was telling us what happened. But Pollard had 16 carries. Spears had 4. Spears did run 1 more route, but both were involved in the receiving game. I will say encouraging for both running backs was to see a target on 27% of Spears routes and then 28.5% for Pollard. So that is one thing they told us they would do, and they actually did do, is that number 1, they were throwing at a higher rate in week 1, but number 2, they were utilizing both running backs in the receiving game, and that is obviously something we want in fantasy. But yeah, overall, Pollard's really the only Titans player I'd want to be playing this week, with Spears being a pretty low-end option. Final 1 o'clock game is going to be Bucs at Lions. 51.5-point total. Lions 7-point home favorites. For the Bucs, Baker went off in week 1. We need to remember he was playing the Commanders. They're not going to be able to play them every week. We'll pick on them every week. We don't know exactly how good this Bucs offense is until they don't play the worst defense in the NFL. This is another elite matchup for wide receivers, though. Evans, Godwin, they're going to remain must starts, and Baker is yet again a very quality streaming option, so if you used him last week, you might as well stick with him this week. Rashad White lost a lot more work to Bucky Irving than expected, but he's still a must start in my eyes. Irving, high upside bench stash. I don't think you need to play him, but if you had to, he looked really good in week 1 and maybe he has an expanded role this week. I don't think you're starting Cade Otton or Jalen McMillan, but I was encouraged with how they played in week 1 more than just what the box scores indicated. Cade was one of 5 tight ends across the entire NFL with 100% of their team's expected tight end fantasy points, and he actually led the team, including the wide receivers, in routes run. He just had a 7.1% target rate, 0.2 yards per route run, a negative separation score, and only an 8% first read percentage. The thing is, if we look back at their matchup in week 1, the Commanders were an amazing matchup for running backs on the ground, running backs through the air, wide receivers through the air, and they're the single worst matchup for tight end targets. If he's going to lead the team in routes, he's going to be the only tight end they use. I can guarantee you that Otton has better days ahead of him. He is a very sneaky play on Underdog, on DK. 99% of people are going to look at that box score and be like, he has no role on this team. I do think he has a role on this team. McMillan, similar. He caught the touchdown, but you look back at that game, could have had 3 touchdowns, right? Baker missed him on one that was wide open, and then there was another one where the defender saw that it was a walk-in touchdown and grabbed him because they're like, well, I'd rather the ball at the 1-yard line than have him have a walk-in touchdown. He is clearly the wide receiver 3. He is clearly good. He is going to be someone that eats into Godwin and Evans' roles this season, but he's also going to elevate the team. So I'm not saying this is like terrible news for Evans and Godwin. Them having a really quality third wide receiver just puts more pressure on defenses, gives them more outs, and just makes them a better offense overall. So even if Evans, Godwin, they see their roles drop a little bit to give more work to McMillan, if the offense is better, it probably just cancels that out. But I think McMillan has upside. I'd be very happy if I had him in Dynasty, if I, had him in a deeper format, and I would keep an eye on him even in, smaller formats, especially if there's an injury to one of those wide receivers. Other side, Bucs are a negative matchup for wide receivers, a slightly positive one for all other positions. Given how explosive this Lions offense is, I would expect to just lean on their core every single week. Unless they are playing in a terrible spot, especially when they're home, just play them. Laporte is my tight end 3. Gibbs is my running back 8. Montgomery is my running back 23. Amon-Ra St. Brown is my wide receiver 6. And Jameson Williams is my wide receiver 23. They can't all go off every week. You will have duds mixed in there, as we saw with St. Brown last week. And honestly, with many of them last week, it wasn't like some amazing game. I just think it's such a good offense. You just got to be playing them every week. They all have strong ceilings. The one maybe we can start benching is David Montgomery in the future. Once we see Gibbs more removed from this hamstring injury, once he kind of takes back over as that running back 1, maybe. But for right now, I'd start all of them. And then Goff is my quarterback 13, strong option for streaming. 4 o'clock games kick off with Rams at Cardinals, 49-point total. Cardinals, 1.5-point home favorites. For the Rams, Kupp, Kyren, obvious must plays. Stafford, fine streaming option. But because he's a 0 on the ground, this week, more of that. He's a quarterback 17, so more of a lower end streaming option. Right now, I have Demarcus Robinson as my wide receiver 45, Tyler Johnson as my wide receiver 62. Cardinals are a slightly negative matchup, but both should see solid run. If you had Puka, you're in a deeper format. I think both of them would be fine to play. Demarcus Robinson, my favorite though. 47 routes for him, only 34 for Tyler Johnson. He had a much better average separation score. He had a slightly higher first read percentage. Realistically though, it's Kupp. This whole offense can be Kupp and Kyren. Kupp had a 43% target share. He had a 58% first read percentage. That's absolutely crazy. The offense is going to flow through him. It's going to flow through Kyren while Puka is out. Colby Parkinson, solid streaming option. Tight end 13 right now. If you had Njoku, you had Ferguson. I think Parkinson, I think Hunter Henry are 2 tight ends you can look at that, they're only going to project for 4 or 5 targets, right? That's not earth-shattering. You're not getting, 20 targets at the tight end position, but it's tight end. Even if you're only going to see 4, 5, maybe 6 targets, given the efficiency I expect from Colby Parkinson, that would be enough to where you'd be okay with that. For the Cardinals, I don't want people to panic on Marvin Harrison Jr. since he is a rookie. His first game was at Buffalo. That's one of the worst spots you could have. It's like at Buffalo, at the Jets, at the 49ers, at Kansas City. You don't want to be playing in those areas. He still led the team in routes. He's obviously someone they're highly invested in. He is obviously a talented player. They're going to want to develop him. He's going to be fine. More volume is coming. With that being said, he was 11th on his own team in EPA per target. He had a negative separation score. He was one of the slower rookie wide receivers in week 1. He was only had 3 plays where he was the first read. That was half as many as Dortch. It was less than Trey McBride as well. Again, better days are coming. He's an elite prospect. He's not going to be a total bust. I can say, though, it was very difficult to rank him highly last week. I did everything I could to get him where he was, and he still wasn't ranked that highly. This week, it's easier. He projects better, even dropping his target share, but he doesn't project amazingly. I'm not in love with playing him, but it's an elite wide receiver matchup. He still does grade out as a wide receiver 26. Again, even dropping his target share from what we expected last week. Dortch right now, 46th. Michael Wilson, wide receiver 60. So I don't think any of their wide receivers are must plays, but I do think you're still rolling with Marvin Harrison Jr. You drafted him in round 2, likely round 2 in your draft. Unless you really hit on the other wide receivers and you're comfortable benching him, I think you probably just roll with him, keep playing him. As for McBride, I don't have any concerns with him. Second highest first read percentage on the team. He had a very strong separation score. He's going to be just fine. At running back, we did talk about in week 1 how James Conner would likely open the season hot, open the season as a featured running back, and then slowly lose work as the season goes on. He was the 12th most featured running back in week 1, also 12th in expected fantasy points. It's a negative matchup for running backs, but he's still my running back 16 right now. You're probably starting him if you have him, and then play Kyler every week. Steelers at Broncos is up next, very low. 36.5 point total. Steelers 3-point road favorites. For the Steelers, Fields is likely going to start again. I believe they announced it as official, but he's probably going to start again if they haven't announced it. That is a downgrade to the wide receivers. It's also an awful matchup for the wide receivers, and so the only one you're playing is George Pickens. He looked fantastic in week 1, though. I have him ranked right now, even given Fields at quarterback, given the poor matchup, still as my wide receiver 21. He improved a lot over the offseason, in my opinion. We had concerns that maybe he wasn't a true alpha. Maybe he was more of a rock-solid wide receiver, too. If you would get that alpha on the other side, you'd have a great duo. I think he's an alpha. I think he's a number 1 wide receiver now. He'd be someone that, he was close to hitting big time in week 1. But let's be honest, in week 1, they got up, right? They were winning, and it was pretty obvious that the Falcons couldn't really do anything against the Steelers defense. And so they knew they could play a little bit more conservative, play a little bit slower, run the ball, just kind of stay ahead because they didn't think the Falcons could catch up to them. It's not going to happen a ton. The Steelers are not some amazing offense this season. I like him a lot. I would be very willing to go out in the trade market, and I think he's got like wide receiver 2 value. I'd be willing to go after George Pickens right now. At running back, Najee was featured in week 1, but that was because Warren was coming off the hamstring. It's not going to be that wide of a split moving forward. I don't know exactly what the split's going to be. Hopefully we get like an article that comes out, some report, maybe they say something. Right now I'm projecting Najee's in running back 30, Warren 42. If it seems like the split's still going to be there, maybe I can bump it up and maybe it's like, Warren comes in 50th, Najee comes in like 25th. We can kind of separate it a little bit more. I'll play around with it. For right now, though, you're not starting Warren. And if you had to start Najee, I don't know. Like he looked good in the preseason, looked good in camp, looked pretty good in week 1. I'd be fine rolling with him. Only other player considering is Fields. Risky. Basically, it's like he grades out as quarterback 12. We know Justin Fields could be the quarterback 1. I mean, he could bust off 2 long touchdown runs. Like anything could happen with Fields, but he could also implode. They could go to another backup quarterback. Like I don't know what they're going to do with Wilson, if they're going to make Wilson active, but still start Fields, in which case I'd be even more concerned that it's like, oh no, if Fields throws 2 picks, gets sacked a bunch of times, which he can do. He can explode or implode, I guess. He can do both. He can explode and he can implode. I'd be a little bit more worried if I knew that Wilson was able to play. If Wilson was inactive, I'd have more confidence in Fields. But yeah, he grades out as a quarterback 12 right now. For the Broncos side, believe it or not, Courtland Sutton had the 3rd most expected fantasy points among all wide receivers in week 1. 12 targets, 2 end zone targets, 9 first read targets. They clearly wanted to get him the ball. These were not low ADOT targets like they were with Veal. These were intermediate, deep downfield. They wanted to get him the ball downfield. That's what we want in fantasy. Unfortunately, Nix was pretty bad in his first start. The Steelers are also just like an awful matchup for wide receivers and really just a difficult matchup overall, especially for a quarterback like Bo Nix, who's young and who will be susceptible to pressure and to making mistakes. And so it's a bad spot for Denver here. I think that this defensive line for Pittsburgh could really just overwhelm Bo Nix, force him into all these checkdowns, never push the ball downfield. And when he does, he's probably going to be a little bit nervous. He's going to have pressure and he's probably going to be off target. So it's a bad spot. Steelers also have really good cornerback play. That's bad for Sutton. But even factoring a lot of that stuff in, maybe I drop him a little bit. But right now he's projecting as the wide receiver 23 because he had sick volume in week 1. Behind him, you can take a shot on McLaughlin. You can take a shot on Williams. I don't think this is a spot I want to attack for Denver. I would mostly bench everyone. And again, I mentioned Veal. His targets were so close to the line of scrimmage. Like, I guess in a full PPR deeper format, if you had to play him as your like second flex spot, sure, because it's possible he racks up another 8 receptions, but for 20 yards. Like, that could literally happen. It's not a good spot. Sutton's probably the only one I want to play. Final 4 o'clock game is going to be Bengals at Chiefs, 47.5 point total. Chiefs 6-point home favorites. For the Bengals, KC is a horrific matchup for wide receivers, -1 for running backs and quarterbacks, very slightly positive for tight ends. I don't know yet the status of Higgins, kind of seeming like he's not going to play through Wednesday. He has not practiced. If he were to miss again, you'd be able to play Moss. Chase would probably just be the only one you want to play, though. It does not project as a good spot. You do not want to play people at Kansas City. Even Chase, as the only clear alpha wide receiver in this team, will not project well, but you probably just have to play Jamar Chase, especially when T. Higgins is out. Just don't expect a great game, but you got to play him. For the Chiefs, Mahomes, Rice, Pacheco, Kelsey, all must starts. Worthy is a strong start as well. They had a tough matchup in week 1 against the Ravens, but they still performed great. And I think they drop a nuke this week, especially if Cincy looks lost against the Patriots last week. If they play as poorly as they did in week 1, it could be a nightmare in Kansas City. We could see touchdowns really pile up for Kansas City. Start all of the Chiefs players. Sunday night game is going to be Bears at Texans, 45.5 point total. Texans 6.5 point home favorites. For the Bears, Caleb looked pretty terrible in week 1, but if you have a Dunze set to miss time, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, I don't care how bad Caleb Williams looked, they're going to be pepperwood targets. You got to be playing them this week. This is also a pretty plus matchup for wide receivers. So again, both them must starts in my eyes. Behind those two, Swift is a poor matchup, but he grades out as my running back 28. He was the 8th most featured running back in week 1. If the volume can increase for this Bears offense, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was like 53 plays they ran. They're going to run more plays on average. If that can happen, Swift is going to look better. These wide receivers are going to look better. I wouldn't go to Caleb. I wouldn't go to secondary running backs, secondary wide receivers. Wouldn't go to tight ends. It would really just be start their top 2, maybe play Swift as like a low-end running back 2. For the Texans, Stroud is an absolute stud. While this is a negative matchup for wide receivers, and it's going to be tough knowing which wide receiver is going to go off every week, I think you have to just play that core. You got to just play Nico, play Diggs, play Tank Dell every week, play Stroud every week. There's going to be some weeks where they do mediocre. There's going to be some weeks where it's Nico, some weeks where it's Dell, but you got to just be playing all of them in basically any matchup. But again, a poor matchup. The Bears do have a very strong defense. Mixon was the 6th most featured running back in week 1, had the most expected fantasy points of any running back in week 1. You are playing him every week regardless of matchup. Then finally, Monday night game, Falcons at Eagles, 47 point total. Eagles 6.5 point home favorites. For the Falcons, I expect them to look better than they did in week 1. The Steelers have a much stronger pass rush than the Eagles do. They have better cornerback play as well. They're a much tougher matchup for wide receivers. So they were in a tough spot in week 1. It's not a good spot against the Eagles because the Eagles are still a quality team. But for wide receivers, you went from a terrible matchup to one that is significantly better. I think it is a bounce back spot for Drake London. Eagles are the 5th best matchup for wide receiver targets, the 9th best matchup for yards per reception to wide receivers. I would personally start all of Bijan, London, and Pitts. I would not play any secondary players, and I would not play Kirk Cousins until he looks better. Then for the Eagles, Hurts, Saquon, Brown, Smith. all weekly must starts regardless of matchup. Dallas Goedert, every week he's going to be like a low end tight end 1 to a high end tight end 2. Matchup is just not going to matter for the Eagles this season. You always start their top end players. Again, Hurts, Saquon, Brown, and Smith. And you always have Goedert as an option, but not an amazing one. So leave a like. If you made it this far, it was quite a long video. I have detailed projections on every single player on my website. There's like 400 or 500 players that have a detailed projection, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Along with the position reports, I would definitely look at those. They're a great resource for understanding who the best players are at each position, how valuable they have been in fantasy. And as we work our way through the season, we're going to get trending players. We're going to get a bunch more statistics on these guys. It's only week 1, and there's still a ton of information there, along with the trade targets I have personally picked, along with my trade model as well. Ton of information on the site. And then starting next week, we're going to have the rest of the season rankings as well, which you can feed into the trade calculator. So a ton of information. Again, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Check that out if you've not done so already. And if you want free access, all you got to do is sign up for your first Underdog account today using promo code FFA. Do that and make a minimum $10 deposit. You'll not only get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, but the following morning, you're getting access to my rankings and my positional reports as well for free for the rest of the season. So that'll do it for this one. Please leave a like if you watched this far. Remember to subscribe if you are new here, but thanks for watching.